you're playing the story over and over in your head, what you should have done, could have done, wish you would have done, what you're going to say next, you start adding these layers of fog to your eyes and to your reality. As humans, we experience a wide range of crazy emotions, and these emotions can come up during challenging times that seem to hit us out of nowhere. That's the purpose of this podcast, to teach you how to move through these difficult situations and harness these emotions that we feel to be able to create the life that you want. My name's Nathaniel Burke, and I'm the host of the Emotional Fitness Podcast. I hope you enjoy. Do you find yourself having negative downward spirals where you just can't seem to get out of, or you're spending all your free time in your head and nothing in there seems to be going well? It just seems to be all negatively based. On today's episode of the Emotional Fitness Podcast, we're discussing exactly that: fear and worry, why we do it, and how to move through it and move on to things that we really want to pursue. So first we have to ask the question, what is worrying? Worrying, depending on your definition, but worrying generally speaking is focusing on something that you don't want to happen. It a lot of the times is based out of fear. And when we look at fear, when you read into it, there are 6 different basic fears that all humans can suffer from. So I'm going to go over these fears, go through them one at a time, and then look at the physical side effects, emotional and mental side effects of worrying and what that can cause. So first, looking at our list, we have the first basic fear is criticism. This is one that most people face, especially when they're younger, and can be crippling for a lot of people because it can stop us from doing the things we want to do. But if you look at criticism, most of the time when we're afraid of criticism or worried about criticism, most of the time it's criticism from people that we don't even care about or that have no impact in our lives. And the people that really care about us and that truly are there for us won't criticize us anyway. So that's something that you can take with you and recognize, and try to recognize next time you are worried about criticism. The next one on the list is the fear of ill health. This one a lot of people can suffer from because the news and certain media outlets are constantly talking about the next sickness out there. But when you have that fear and worry, that actually lowers your immune system and can cause you to become more sick or be susceptible to sickness. When they do studies on that, and they show people that are more worried about being sick and have that fear, which puts them in a fight or flight or freeze mode or state, that lowers your immune system to up to 50%. So by focusing on what you don't want, you're actually attracting what you could potentially get, which is pretty wild to think about. The next one is fear of a lost loved one. That's tough because we all have people that we love and we don't want to see them go. We want them to stay forever. And I've lost loved ones before, and it's always so challenging. But I always think, if I were to live my days, and as I'm living one at a time here, if I was going to die tomorrow, how would I want to treat that person, those people that I love the most right now? When you have that mentality, it helps you move through that, and even recognizing that we all are going to die at some point. So not to be doom and gloom, it's just to recognize that you have this short time, and if we all spend every one of our days with that mentality of our life is really, those hours, those moments that we have with our loved ones is precious, it's going to fill it up a lot more, and that can actually combat that fear, which is really amazing. The next one on the list is fear of old age. Now, that fear I find interesting because you have certain entities, certain societal norms, commercials, you name it, companies that want us to fear aging. But it's a normal part of being a human. No matter what, we will all get older. It is gonna happen. And just because you're older doesn't mean you're not valuable. Just because you're in your 30s now doesn't mean you're old, or in your 40s or 50s. It still blows my mind when I talk to people and I tell them they're in their 30s and they tell me, oh, you're getting old now. It's like, it's madness. So don't fear age, because we're all going to get older, no matter what. It's just going to happen. If you're not living your life now, that'd be a real fear. The next is the fear of death. Now, I do understand it because death seems so final. However, if we all are going to die anyway, wouldn't you want to live the moments you have now the best you possibly can? Instead of hiding, instead of not making the moves you want to make, instead of not telling that person that you love them every day, or getting over old grudges, or moving past fights you've had with family or friends. That's something I've done recently with somebody I worked with, and to be honest, it felt amazing. Even though this person truly did me wrong at the time, but now I look back at it and I wouldn't want to die. I wouldn't want to be dead with that in my heart. So to have that, to forgive that person, have the forgiveness go both ways, was such an amazing feeling. So on that, don't fear death, because we're all going to get there one day. So fear not living now. And then the last one here, this is the toughest one and the most powerful to overcome, is the fear of poverty. Because that is an everyday real fear, and I get it. I've been there, I've had nothing. And it's still something that I have to continue to battle to not put energy and effort there. But when you look at and going back to the next part of this, is that when you look at those fears, where do they come from and why do we have these fears? Well, when you look at our brains and how they work, that's our defense mechanism telling us we need to be aware of this. So for example, fear of poverty, it's not being able to have shelter, it's not being able to have food, it's not being able to have clothes. Those are the basic necessities. Those are the big ones, and now we have other things that are associated with that, obviously. But when we look at how our brain works, it's telling us to be aware of these things, because previously when we were cavemen and before that, it would keep us alive. So it's really an amazing mechanism. It's saying, hey, pay attention to this. The problem comes when we put all of our focus and attention on that one thing, and we get stuck there. And that's really the problem. It's not that we're aware of it and paying attention to it. It's when we're spending day in and day out, every waking moment, or even just extra free time when we have in our head, aware of that. I recently did a coaching session with a good friend, and during this session we were talking about the fears that he has. And what happens when you have those fears and you're dwelling on those fears and putting your time and energy into those fears, it actually we think that it's putting us in a state of being aware, which means we're going to be ready, but it actually does the opposite. It puts us in an extreme state of unreadiness and more in a freeze mentality. So when you look at humans and how we perceive danger, or when we know danger is coming, we have three main things, and we always talk about the fight, flight, or freeze. But that order is actually mixed up. When you look at psychology and you look at what research is showing now, the first mechanism we use, because it saves the most energy and it's easiest to do, is freeze. So my point there is that if we're putting all of our attention into that fear, that thing we're worried about, that thing that we don't want to happen, it's going to cause us to freeze, right? So I give the analogy to this during this session of a meteor. And if you were to look up at the sky and you saw a meteor or a plane coming at you, let's say an airplane coming and it's going to come crashing down on you, would you sit there and watch it and study it and be aware of it and stare at it and think about it for minutes and hours or however long it's going to be? Or would you go, oh my God, there is the plane, I need to get out of here and go? And that's the difference there, is I find most people will get stuck just staring, because they think the longer they stare, the more prepared they're going to be, when the reality is it can be further from the truth. And that's what that worry is staring and focusing on what you don't want. So and recognizing that our mechanism is to freeze first, then to run, and then to fight. And if you look at why, again, freezing is the easiest thing to do. It's easy to not move and stay because it reserves energy. The next thing that takes the next most energy is to run. And then lastly, it's to fight, because that takes the most energy and is the highest risk. So that's why we have these fears, or why we worry and why we have these fears. The effects of it are quite profound, and that's what we're going to talk about next here. So I would say, mentally speaking, that's when you're going to see the most effects. Because mentally, if you ever talk to anybody, or if yourself, and I've been there before, if you're ever worried about something, are you happy? Are you filled with joy? Are you filled with kindness? Generally speaking, you're not as much. You're lower in those areas. You are, because you're just so focused on this other thing. It also drains you. So emotionally, you feel drained because you've been spending all that energy focusing on what you don't want, and so emotionally, you're not in a good place either. Now, too, when you're going back to the mentally side, is that because we're so focused on that negative thing that we don't want, sometimes it's even hard to see any other solution. When the reality is, there's a lot of options there. It's not just stop and stare and I only have one plane that's coming right, or one thing that's coming right at me. You have options. There's things you can do. And then physically, as I mentioned before, when you have that worry and when you're in fear, that puts you in that fight, or that freeze, flight, or fight, and that causes your cortisol to go through the roof, which is a good defense mechanism if we're going to use it. But a lot of times it's just in our head, and we still get that physical response. And so when you're in that state, that fight or flight and freeze, again, you're having that cortisol. That means your digestive tract shuts off. So having your digestive tract shuts off because you're about to run, freeze, or fight, all the blood goes to your limbs. Our brains are really good at that time at pulling out memories, but not taking in new memories. So as I'm discussing this and explaining this, you can see where some of these problems in lies. Now, we're not able to take in information, especially any new information. We really struggle there. And when we want to be in a state of happiness and lightness, all of the blood from our digestive organs and reproductive organs has been sent to our limbs. And so that's where it can cause a lot of digestion issues as well. So that's the effects of it mentally, physically, and emotionally. And then again, there's more we can dive into, but that's just some really good surface stuff that most people can understand. So we've discussed worry, the fears, and the effects of it. Last question is, how do we solve this? And this is the biggest question, this stuff I love absolutely most, because it's great to talk about all these things, but if there's no solution, well, then we're just spinning our tires. Thankfully, there's a solution. First solution, I would say, is come to gratefulness. Come back to being thankful. And I say that because it's clearing the lens. If you've been spending, let's say you had a fight with an ex, and you've had this before, or your partner, or at work, or something going on, some sort of situation of drama, and you're playing the story over and over in your head, what you should have done, could have done, wish you would have done, what you're going to say next, you start adding these layers of fog to your eyes and to your reality. And when you keep, because you're creating these beliefs around this story, so when you keep adding these layers of fog, you can't see much else. Everything else seems kind of mucky, except for the one thing you're focusing on. So when you are grateful and when you're thankful, it helps to clear those away. Think of it as the windshield washer when you're going through a storm or you're going through mud. You're constantly getting mud on your windshield and you don't wipe it off. It's just going to look really shitty out there. When in reality, just the one path you're on is shitty. You can turn and go down a different path. So use those windshield wipers, and it gets you in a more positive state to see things differently. That's what's so critical. I'm not saying it's going to wipe away all the things that are out there, because it's not how it works. But it helps you see more. Think of it, instead of having your binoculars on and you can only see here, think of it as opening that all up and clearing all that stuff away to see more. So, using gratefulness and gratitude and thankfulness, and start writing down and listing the things you're grateful for in that situation, or just in anything that you can think of. It's massively powerful, and it changes the wiring in your brain, and it will change your life. I promise you that. Next is looking at your mindset. So having that gratefulness will help change your focus, and that's one of the 3 ways to change your mindset, is where your focus is. So what kind of questions are you asking yourself? If you're asking yourself, why did this happen to me? Why does this always happen to me? Why can't it happen to somebody else? who's doing this, whatever your kind of questions you're asking yourself. If you start asking, what can I learn here? How can I move through this? How will this make me stronger? You see what we did there? We shifted those questions. And where focus goes, energy flows. And we focus on the questions that we ask ourselves. So instead of asking yourself, why do I have this job I don't like? How can I make this job work for now? Can you flip it? Asking those questions, asking focus questions will help change your focus. The next part of that, and again, I'm giving you easy ones here that anybody can adopt almost instantly. But the second part of that is looking at your physiology. So your physiology being your body. If you've been sitting in front of a screen or on your phone like this for hours and you're having these thoughts going into your head, your body is literally down. And when your head's down like that long, Andrew Huberman talks about this, is how it triggers our brains to be in a state of not readiness and of slowness. So when we have our head up and we're up and upright, more importantly, and moving, it's going to trigger us to want to take action. So if you're in that place right now, change the questions you're asking. How can you learn from this? What can I do to make this situation better? What kind of solutions can I come up with? How can I take action and control of my situation right now? And then how's my physiology? When was the last time I exercised? Maybe I should go for a walk and put my phone away. Maybe I need to stop walking around like this with my head down. Maybe I need to stop watching so much TV and sitting all day long. Change your physiology, change your focus. Those are the two easiest ways to move through worry and move through these fears. And then lastly, I talked about this earlier, but is the 90-10 rule. And I really love this rule because it's quite simple. So you never want to spend more than 10% of your time on the problem. And you want to spend the other 90% of the time on the solution. So focus on the solutions. Again, going back to focus. Focus on the solutions. Focus on questions, empowering questions that are going to help you. And change your physiology. Move, do something active. Get some sunlight, go outside, go for a walk in the park. Doing those things will help you move through worry. And I say this because I've done this so many times and help other people do it and move through these things. So I hope you got great value from this. If you have any questions, please reach out. If you haven't yet, you can go to lifepurposely.ca to sign up for our newsletter. Emily is putting out some amazing content weekly. It's a powerful stuff, so you can go to lifepurposely.ca to sign up. Stay tuned because I am going to be releasing something really exciting and really new coming up very shortly here, so stay tuned for that. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you on the next episode.